So, Happy New Year to everybody and welcome to this session. Today we have Pete Evangelist to talk about PMBOK 7th edition. He'll be enlightening us about this new edition and talking about the details of PMBOK here. I'll have a quick introduction on PMI Northeast Ohio chapter, then followed by his presentation and Q&A, and then we'll wrap up with few more information about how to get the PDUs for this particular session. Before we begin, I'd like to suggest everybody to just mute up your Zooms, and while the session is going on, you can just shoot your questions in the chat box, and Pete will answer either while his presentation is going on, or at the end if we have time left. I think it depends how many questions we get. Special thanks to our sponsors, Apex Systems, Strategic System, Tech Systems, for helping us get through these Tech Thursday events. To just quickly go through, there are a lot of learning opportunities on our website. You can go to PMI Northeast Ohio website and in the career opportunities, you can either have a lot of learning opportunities or go through the job boards where you can either post the jobs or look for jobs who are looking for this. So as I said, like there are multiple learning opportunities for peak business certification courses, Velocity Teach virtual courses, and others that you can look through on their website. And finally, again, just use the chat box and shoot your questions as and when you have them. So I'd like to just hand over it to Pete now, and just Pete, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Amir. Hello to everybody. My name is Pete Evangelista. I am a project manager. I was relocated to Cleveland from Detroit when I was about 23 years old by General Electric. I come from an IT background, and I started running projects pretty early in my career, and I've been doing it in some form or fashion ever since. I've worked almost all my career in consulting and doing contracting, so I've had an opportunity to move around to a lot of organizations in Northeastern Ohio, which is where most of my work has been done. I've had out-of-town clients, of course, but I've spent most of my the last 10 years or so helping organizations with their project process and setting up PMOs. I've been doing project management training for about 15 years through Baldwin Wallace, the ERC, with my own consulting company. And I'm also a member of Peak Business Management. That's a confederacy or a affiliation of trainers. And we've been associated with the Northeastern Ohio PMI chapter for, I think Joe helped get us set up about a year ago, so that we could offer certification trainings, primarily PMP, DASM, and ACP, although we do other training, of course. So I am a certified or tagged, what do they call us? A tagged trainer, an ATP, authorized training partner with PMI. So I've had my nose into the 7th edition for a little while. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. No, I'm not. Let's try that once again. I'm going to start sharing my screen. How's that? A little better?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, very good. So agenda, just I went through a little introduction myself. We're going to go through the PMBOK guide and the PMP exam. We're going to hit that topic first, just because there tends to be a lot of questions about what's the relationship between a new PMBOK guide and the PMP exam. For those of you that are certified already, might not be a huge concern of yours, but as you are mentoring others along, coming into contact with others, it might be some helpful information. Then we're going to talk about the standard for project management, an overview, and this might be kind of news to some folks who have maybe, if you haven't had your nose into the document yet. And then we'll talk about the PMBOK 7th edition, of course, and why that's different, and what's some things I think to be looking for and get a little excited about. And we're going to talk about tailoring and the PMI standards, which I think is kind of a really cool thing. Again, if you haven't been out to the PMI site and looked at this, hopefully there's some fresh information here that you can make great use of. So that's what we'll cover in the next 40, I'm shooting for about 45 minutes to allow time for questions at the end. I know they said it was going to be Q&A. It might be more Q&O, like question and my opinion versus answers. Or questions and questions, but we'll see how that goes as we go. Just in terms of how to run things here, I mentioned here that I like your video turned on. That's just my preference, just so that I don't feel like I'm acting as a radio DJ. If you're willing to do that, I understand that this is lunch hour and you may be eating lunch, and that's fine too. I'm not going to get upset one way or the other, but if I see your face, I can get at least some recognition, like, yeah, I'm making sense to you. Or when you get up and to let the dog out or whatever, then I know maybe I need to pick up the pace or whatever. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do, just to keep this interactive, is to do a little poll. So I'm going to ask you guys a question. And I know that sometimes on mobile devices, the polling in Zoom doesn't work fantastic. If that's the case, just kind of go with it and we'll get as many responses as we possibly can. So I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll, my first question. And the question is, which of the following is most correct? The PMBOK guide updates lead to the PMP exam changes because the PMBOK guide is the main exam prep book or document, or the PMBOK guide changes and PMP exam changes are not directly related. The updates are caused by other factors. So I can see the responses coming in. And hopefully we'll get just about everybody responding. Your answers or your ability to report the PDU credit is not dependent on correct answers to my polls. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now. If you're getting your answer ready, just submit that, and I'm going to close it in 3, 2, 1. There we go. Let's go ahead and share the results. We see that we had almost an even split. 57% said the PMBOK updates lead to PMP changes because the PMBOK is the main exam prep document. And 43% said changes to the PMBOK guide and changes to the exam are not directly related. Updates are caused by other factors. Well, here's the news. Those of you picked the second answer, the 43% of you that picked that are correct. It's actually, there's not a direct relationship between those two things. So here's, just look at the chronology of what's happened in the last 18 months or so. Actually, just in the last 12 months, right? The exam changed last January 1st of 2021. And then this summer, on July 1st, the PMBOK guide was released, okay? So exam updates are not directly tied to the PMBOK guide updates. There is some relationship, but it's not very direct. The PMBOK guide is only one of many references for the exam. But I would not consider it, and we at Peak do not consider it a test preparation tool. It's used, but you can't rely solely on that. You can't just sit down and read the PMBOK cover to cover and then expect that you're going to be able to pass the exam. The PMBOK guide, my third bullet point here says the PMBOK guide 7th edition has been released, but the PMP exam has only recently, and I'm talking very recently, and slowly begun referencing the 7th edition. Okay, and I'll get into those details a little bit. The PMBOK updates are based on important factors, but the PMBOK update is not a major factor. Okay, so that's kind of the relationship between those two. Let's move on. So the question you might be having is, well, why aren't the PMP exam changes tied to the PMBOK updates? Here's the process that PMI uses. The exam updates are tied to a study that they do, a survey really of our industry, of our profession. And it's something called the PMP role delineation study. So I don't know, maybe someone here has actually received the survey and asked about what they do for a living and what are the principles that you use, what are the practices that you use. They come out about every 5 to 7 years, and they will pull existing PMPs. So the longer your PMP, the chances are higher that you might be asked to participate in the role delineation study. And that's actually what drives the PMP exam. Here's what I want to make sure we're clear about. What drives the exam, if you're looking for the definitive source of what is in the exam, you actually have to look at the exam content outline, okay? And you'll notice here that this was published, the exam content outline was most recently updated in January 2021, and the 7th edition didn't come out until July, okay? So that's kind of there's a little bit of a difference. To the point that I was making earlier about the PMBOK is not the sole reference that drives the PMP exam. Here's the reference list of materials that are driving the PMP exam right now. And you can see these 10 periodicals. I only own 5 of these, and some of my editions are not even up to date. So there's like the Agile Guide. There's the 6th edition of the PMBOK, right? You're like, wait a second, we got the 7th edition now. Why are we still referencing the 6th? We're going to get into that. There's Kersner's book, of course, and those of us in Northeastern Ohio love reading Kersner's books. And I have the Schwab book from some adjunct work I used to do. I have the Gray, the Larson book from a master's class I used to teach. So this is only half of the reference list of what goes into the exam, okay? So to think that it's solely based on the PMBOK is a little bit of a fallacy and a little bit of a misconception. So if there's anybody out there that's preparing to take the exam, just recognize that there's this whole list of materials, and that can be super overwhelming. It's over 5,000 pages. Just a small commercial for the Peak group that I conduct training with. That's why we are an authorized training partner, because PMI gives us the material. We greatly enhance the material that we get from them. And that actually walks us through everything that's in the exam content outline and allows students to prepare for the exam, okay? I think that's all there. You guys ready for another quiz? Another poll. Here it comes. When was the first PMBOK guide published? Was it 1991, 1996, 2001, or 2006? What do you think? I see the results starting to come in. All right, we got about 84% of the people, 86% of the folks on the meeting have responded. I'm going to go ahead and close the polling in 3, 2, 1, and close it. And I'll share the results. 62% of you said 1996 was the first edition of the PMBOK. And there were some other answers, but that is the correct one. The first PMBOK was published in 1996. That's actually the year that I joined the Northeastern Ohio PMI chapter, when I joined PMI, and actually when I sat for the exam. Back in those days, things were a little bit different. You actually sat for the exam and then you applied to become a PMP. So by the time I actually finished my paperwork and submitted for my certification, the second edition was already out. And unfortunately, I didn't keep the first edition. I really wish I did. But I think when I got my PMP certification and I had the second, or maybe I even waited till the third edition in celebration, I think I actually burned my first edition. I know that sounds like heresy, which it is. I wish I would have kept it, but you can see here that there has been new editions coming out about every 4 to 5 years. And now we're up to the 7th edition, and it was released in 2021. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the 7th edition now, because I'm done covering the relationship between the PMP exam and the 7th edition. Let's just talk about what the 7th edition is. So we see that the 7th edition is currently published in 10 languages other than English. The 6th edition was actually translated in 12 different languages, so there may be some other ones coming. For those of you that may be thinking, well, gee, how do I get my hands on such a interesting piece of literature? Let's just look at that real quick. So I'm just hit the PMI site. I'm going to go ahead and log in real quick, because I guess my login expired. And you'll see once you're on the main page of PMI, if you just go to the standards and publications, which is right in the middle of the navigational ribbon at the top, you can click on the PMBOK guide, and that'll take us back. I was actually on that page. And then if you just scroll down a little bit, I don't know why they make you scroll down, but if you're a PMI member, you can download the 7th edition for free. So if you haven't done that already, I would strongly suggest you go ahead and do that. You can also order a printed copy. I have not done that yet. I've just got my my electronic version. Then you can see here's the 10 different languages, that if you need it in a different language, or you have family members that live in other parts of the world and speak different languages, and you're looking for a great holiday gift, you can go ahead and order the different language for them. So that's how to get it. Again, if you don't have it yet, I would strongly suggest that you go ahead and get that downloaded. So let's talk a little bit about what went into the 7th edition. So you can see here's just a summarization of some of the feedback that was received. We need the PMBOK to better align with how we work today. Things have certainly been evolving over the last few years since the last publication. I think we would all agree with that. Another major piece of feedback was our team needs help with delivering outcomes. It's like, you think back to when the PMBOK was originally published, in the one that I studied under, extremely process oriented, right? So the idea was, hey, if you follow these processes, chances are good that you'll come out with a successful project. Well, we've learned over the years that that's not a great assumption, right? That just checking the boxes on a process doesn't necessarily lead to value being created within your organization. And so PMI recognizing, I think, insightfully recognizing, coming to the realization that the process does not equal success, has really focused more on becoming more principled and asking project managers kind of to up their game a little bit in terms of being able to understand the context, understand the landscape, understand the environment within which you are asked to run your projects, and really providing you with some tools and techniques to allow you to make that kind of assessment. Another piece of feedback was just being able to adapt to the changes in the marketplace, And then the last one says we must identify the right delivery approach. So this has been a huge topic, I think, for lots of people. I know the clients that I have been working with in the last couple of years are just grappling with, well, how agile should we be? Given the nature of our business, given the nature of how projects come to us, given how well we can define our requirements up front, should we be more predictive or should we be more adaptive? Or more typically, should we do something that's a hybrid? In almost every organization, I mean, I really have never worked with anybody that is completely at one end or the other. There's nobody that I know is running agile projects strictly from the manifesto, right? It's just, you need to make some other accommodations. So those are some of the things that were driving why actually the creation of the 7th edition. One of the things that we talk about amongst the peak trainers is the idea of just permanent whitewater, meaning there's always churn. There's always things going on in our workplaces, in our marketplaces, in our technology landscape and environment, so that the need for us to be able to read and adapt is really important, right? And you think about whitewater, and I've done not a fair amount, but I've done some whitewater traversing whitewater rafting in my day. You can go down the same river at different times of the season, and it's going to navigate differently. You have to be able, even in that white water, you have to be able to adapt. So that's, again, I think one of the things that's kind of a big driving force for the 7th edition and how it is positioned and presented to us. I have another set of questions for you. So I'm going to launch another poll. This one is a twofer. You're actually getting 2 questions at once. So here we go. Question number 1, which of the following is most correct? The PMBOK guide is the standard for project management. It is the standard. Or the PMBOK guide and the standard for project management are 2 different documents that are published together. Second question, which of the following is most correct? The PMBOK guide is the project management body of knowledge, or the PMBOK guide is a guide to the project management body of knowledge. I see the responses coming in. Thank you for participating. And I see about 83% of us have responded. I'm going to go ahead and close our polling in 3, 2, 1. And I'm going to go ahead and share the results. So which of the following is most correct? The PMBOK guide is the standard for project management, and some of us picked that answer. The majority of us picked the second option. The PMBOK guide and the standard for project management are 2 different documents published together. That's actually the more correct answer. A lot of us would like to believe that the guide is the standard, but I'll talk about that difference in just a second. There is this is kind of new compared to the earlier publications of the PMBOK guide. So this idea that there's a standard for project management, kind of conceptually, how do we do things as a discipline? How do we do things as project managers in terms of our philosophy, our stance, our ethics, and then there's the actual techniques and methods that we employ to make those principles happen. That's kind of the difference between the two, and I'll talk about that more in just a second. But let me get to the other answer, the other question as well. Which of the following is most correct? The PMBOK guide is the project management body of knowledge, or is it a guide to the body of knowledge? Well, the second the second answer is actually more correct, because when you think about what the body of knowledge is, it's really everything that we know about project management. It's the knowledge that's in the heads of every single person on this call, right? If I'm talking to Joe, and he says, "Hey, I just tried this new thing with my stakeholders. You know, I tried giving them cannolis at the beginning of every meeting because that made them happy." I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, that's part of the body of knowledge of project management now, right? It might not be in the guide, right? But that the guide is trying to give us a big swath or the best practices that we know about the body of knowledge, but there's no way it can encompass all the body knowledge because we're all carrying around a set of that ourselves. Hopefully I'm making some sense to you. So let's talk a little bit more about this, the idea of the standard for project management and the PMBOK guide. So here's kind of a look inside. I'm not really, well, actually, I am going to take you inside in just a second. But here's just how the contents are organized. And I just kind of wanted to summarize it here. You see here that we have the preface, where it's actually, I thought this was actually kind of an interesting read, because PMI is trying to convey to us as members of its organization why it's publishing this new edition and some of the thought process that went behind it. I actually thought that was pretty well written. And then what you'll see is a table of contents, which is plural, because there's two other sections to the publication, and of course the list of figures and tables. So the first section is pretty small. The first 59 pages are the standard for project management, and then a few pages of references and index. So again, this is a pretty tightly written conceptual summarization of what we do in the project management profession. And then the next 200 pages or so is actually the guide to the body of knowledge, where we get into some of the tools and techniques. And then of course, PMI being who they are, you get almost another 100 pages of references, appendixes, glossaries, and index, which is good. It's all good reference material. So again, the standard is more kind of a mindset of who we are, and the guide is more tactical. Here's the tools and how to use them. So the standard is organized in a very simply, just there's an introduction to it, a system for value delivery. Again, the emphasis in PMI's most recent publications has been much more on delivering value, which if you've been to the PMI events over the last years, and you've heard Harold Kersner talk about that, you know, starting 10 years ago, he just kept pounding the idea of value versus over process. And then there's also the project management principles. So, we used to always be very deliverable driven, right? That we would follow this process and create this artifact, right? This is what we create. And now with this idea of system of delivery, we're actually thinking more about the value that we're creating and how do we track that delivery? Does it create value? Does it solve a problem? And sometimes that extends well after the project is formally closed, right? So PMI spent some more energy trying to equip us to help our organizations think about how we actually track the value of our projects. So here's just kind of a summarization again of how things are organized. We have activities, what we do. We have outputs, which is what we create out of those activities. We have outcomes, which is what the customer, either internal or external, experience, and that should lead us to some value, right? It's not just a matter of following a process, following back in the previous PMBOK language, we would follow our ITTOs, right? If you're familiar with that, if you remember that term, is our inputs, our tools, our techniques, and our outputs. That's still there kind of underneath, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that pretty soon. But we're understanding that success of our projects it's more Then delivering scope within time and budget. Yes, those are good things to do as a project manager. Delivering your scope within time and budget is a good thing to do. But that doesn't necessarily guarantee value. And that's really more of being able to understand that as we're developing and delivering our projects, being able to measure that and convey that has become much more of a focus. You see that these major components here are all done within our project environment, internal and external. So considering what's going on within our organizations, again, this kind of whitewater of changes in the marketplace, changes in technology, and then just being able to understand what's going on with our stakeholders. And most of my human interactions are not necessarily crisp, right? They're a little bit squishy. How do we deal with people who are inherently weird, right? And there may be external factors too that we're running our projects in, like I don't know, a global pandemic, right? So all of these things come into play as we're considering our projects. How are we equipped to deal with these things? One of the things that the standard offers up are this set of principles, of project management principles. And as a longtime member, like I said, I've been a member of this organization for 25 years. I'm really happy to see that the focus is shifting from process to principles. PMI, again, I mentioned this earlier, is reaffirming that I, as a project manager, am a thinking, adapting professional. I am a business partner, and I'm less of a programmed box checker, right? And I don't mean to make that sound too derogatory to the past bodies of knowledge, but it's just, to me, it's so much more helpful, it's so much more real than just looking at, the list of, I don't know, I'll open up my 6th edition of the PMBOK here and take a look at my project management process groups and knowledge map areas and say, oh, here's all the things I have to do with each one of these knowledge areas fits in each one of these process groups. I'm going to go through and do all these things. Well, that may be helpful, right? But I have to have it applied properly. These principles also are tied back to the code of ethics and professional conduct that you basically sign off that you agree to when you become a PMI member, and certainly when you become a PMP. So I'm not going to go into these details. I'm going to leave that to the pleasure of your reading as you download the document and read through it. I don't want to give up too much of the excitement. So anyway, that in summary, that's what the standard does for us. Now, let's move on and talk about the actual guide to the PMBOK, the 7th edition. So the 7th edition is also structured, and then the way I'm going to go through it is just a brief introduction to it. We're going to talk about project performance domains, and then how do we tailor, and what is a domain? What is a domain? It just means it's this body of things that we should know as project managers. Some of you have been on other webinars where me or other peak members were talking about the exam, and the exam has domains as well. I don't want to get those, that because they use the same word, I don't want to get those things confused, right? The project performance domains are how the PMBOK is structured. There's also domains for what you should know to take the exam. That's completely separate. Okay, but if we're going to talk about these performance domains, but then I think kind of the key shift is the idea of tailoring. Now you can go back through the earlier versions of the PMBOK. In fact, it talks about it in the 6th edition about being able to adapt what they're talking about here. There's really a big focus in the 7th edition about tailoring and making sure that we're doing the right stuff for the right situation. And then we're going to end by just talking about the models, the methods, and the artifacts. Okay, so what are these domains? There's 8 of them, and the performance domains are stakeholder, team, development approach and life cycle, planning, project work, delivery, measurement, and uncertainty, right? So you're looking at uncertainty, you say like, oh, well, I used to have a whole section of the PMBOK on risk. That's It's basically the same thing. They just kind of renamed it. But there is a shift from knowledge areas to project performance domains. Okay. I'm going to step through these one at a time, but very, in the interest of time, I'm going to be doing it very briefly. So again, there's these 8 performance areas. The first one is stakeholders, engaging with stakeholders. I'm thinking back to in olden days when I was running projects, even well before the Agile Manifesto was written. We would do some requirements gathering and some design workshops with our key stakeholders to begin the project. And then we kind of wave bye-bye and just ask them to slide pizzas under the project team door every once in a while, keep us fed while we worked on stuff. And then we bring it back out to them and say, hey, what do you think? Right. And then they'd be like, nope. Then we go back and do it over again. It was still iterative back in those days, by the way. We were wasting kind of a lot of planning time. But the idea now is that we have to be able to engage with the stakeholders, and they may play a much more prominent role with us throughout the life of the project. And the body of knowledge goes through some of those details. Another performance domain is the team, right? Just understanding that our teams are different. And they vary all the time according to our needs, according to the work that needs to get done, according to the demographics of our organization or our business partners. We include self-organizing and self-directing teams now. For those of you that are studying for DASM or interested in that, another publication is Our Way of Working, which they do a pretty good job, I think, of tying the body of knowledge back to these concepts that are outlined in more detail in the Choose Your Wow for Disciplined Agile. There's also our development approach and life cycle. So again, I mentioned earlier about the idea of being able to pick our project approach according to the circumstances. And again, PMI is definitely embracing the idea of agile and more adaptive techniques. And how do we know that we're confident that we oh, I'm sorry, there's still people in the waiting room. Oops, my bad. How do we know that we're picking the right approach? Planning. We still need to plan, right? This has always been something throughout all of the PMBOKs, but we're starting to understand that when is it appropriate to plan, to invest in planning, right? I was just working this morning with one of my clients. We're talking about our project intake process, and we're trying to set some guidelines of when does it make sense for us to spend a lot of time on planning? When do we need a very precise estimate versus when do we need a less precise estimate? Where is the payoff? Actually delivering the project work. So the PMBOK, of course, covers being able to continue to lead our project teams through the actual creation of value-adding deliverables, and being able to foster the team along the way. There's also, we cover in our performance domains the concept of delivery. I think that I'm happy to see that there's a delineation between solution development and solution delivery. Bless you. This last bullet point I think is important. Business value continues to be captured long after the project is ended. So we're starting to recognize that how we deliver our value, is it in small increments? Is it all in a big bang? What makes best sense for our particular business situation? And again, the PMBOK, the new version of the PMBOK spends some energy going into that. And then the idea of measurement. This is all about metrics. How can we empirically prove that the requirements are met and that we've met the definition of done, depending on the terminology you're using. And then the last domain is the idea of uncertainty, which again, you can associate with risk, right? We need to manage risk, both, and according to PMI, both positive and negative risk. and that could be, by breaking things down into small increments and in a very adaptive approach, or maybe in a more predictive approach, allocating some budget contingency or some reserve. Again, there's room for all of that to exist. And again, the new PMBOK goes through some of those details. All right, so those are the domains. Let me check the chats to see if I'm going too fast here. Michael asks, is predictive like waterfall? Yes, I'm sorry, I wasn't clear about that. When I say predictive, I'm meaning waterfall, right? And when I talk about adaptive, I'm talking about more agile type projects. I see them, the approach is really on a spectrum, right, of adaptive to predictive. And we can use a set of guidelines to determine when's it appropriate to use which set of techniques. And no problem about sneezing on Mike. Didn't bother me a bit. I grew up in a very loud household, so I'm used to a lot of noise. Okay, so that's the performance domains. Let's talk a little bit about the models, methods, and artifacts. Okay, so I think that this is where we're getting a little bit more tactical now into the hows. And I think that the new PMBOK does a pretty good job of mapping to a wide range of tools, including Standards Plus, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. So PMI is actually taking a much more modular approach with more real-time connections. Basically, they're putting a lot of information into a digital platform that allows us to access that information in real time, which I think in the long run will give them and us a lot of flexibility. So they don't need to necessarily publish new updates to the PMBOK. When one of the methods or models changes, they actually can change that digitally, and then we can just reference that. I'm going to show you that in just a second. So let's start with models. What are models? Well, models are just a kind of a strategy for attacking a typical business problem within our projects. I have an example right here for organizational change, and we use the Cotter model. Okay, that's just one of the models that PMI offers us guidance to in the PMBOK. So if those of you are familiar, maybe your organization uses Cotter, or maybe they use ADKAR, right? That's another popular one. I've worked with some of my clients. But the idea is that the PMBOK gives us a summarization of these different models for us to access. And I'll just show you real quick, just as a means of demonstration. I just opened up my 7th edition of the PMBOK. Again, I told you I haven't gotten it printed yet, so I only have it electronically. But here's the Cotter model. You can see, let me expand this a little bit. You can see that it's only a page long, right? It just summarizes the 8 steps. But you can also go out to the PMI standard, which I'm going to show you in just a second, and get some more detail. Or all of us, any of us thinking project managers nowadays certainly can just Google Cotter. Right now, at least a little bit something about it. It gets you equipped enough to go learn some more, which I think is a pretty smart approach rather than trying to cram everything definitively into one document. So that's a little bit, that's just one sample. You can see the other models that are in here. Here's the motivation models. Some of you remember learning about the theory of needs like Maslow and Hertzberg's X, Y, Z theories, complexity models. Like I use the Stacy matrix a lot. That's one that is listed here in the mapping, and you can see it goes across multiple performance domains, right? These models can apply to multiple domains. So a similar thing, the way the process groups and the knowledge areas were mapped out. Similar idea, but I think a little bit more modular in how they're getting delivered. So again, if you're curious about what I'm referencing here, it's on page 173 of the new PMBOK on table 4.4-1. So I'm not showing you any hocus pocus. I'm just taking an extract right out of the PMBOK. Next, we have methods, right? So we have models, then we have methods, and you can see here A method is just a way that we get things done to help us run our projects. So for instance, we have estimating method, right? And one of the many methods that is covered is maybe analogous estimating, right? So, we're looking at projects that we've done similarly in our organization, maybe in the recent past. So if I were to take a look again at the mapping in the PMBOK, you can see here's all the estimating methods. Again, what I'm referencing right here is just an excerpt of the mapping table from page 182 out of the 7th edition. So you can see here, here's all the different estimating methods. Where do they all fall? Oh, well, they support the planning performance domain, right? If I were interested in, meeting and event methods, I might be interested in running a kickoff meeting, right? And I could go look up how they have summarized what that method is about right within the PMBOK. Hopefully I'm making sense to you and not moving too quickly, but I do want to make sure that I can stay within my time frame here. And then lastly, so we have models, we have methods, we also have artifacts. So artifacts are just what we create through our project management activities. For instance, we have a burn down chart, right? So that artifact could be a template, a document, output. These are the actual tangible proof of our work that hopefully are being utilized and applied to our projects to drive value. And you can see, again, I'm just taking an extract from the mapping out of the PMBOK, out of the 7th edition of the PMBOK. The example I picked was the burn chart, and you can see where a burn chart is used in planning as well as in delivery and also in measurement. That's how it maps back to the domains. Okay. So hopefully that makes some sense. We start putting this all together. We might have a scenario, and all I've listed here is a scenario that says, for instance, we work in an industry where a lot of new product innovation is occurring. Change is rapid. So the first thing we might do is select a development approach, right? Predictive, agile, hybrid. I hope what you're thinking right now is if change is rapid and maybe my requirements are not very clear, I'm going to lean to a more adaptive model or agile or maybe a hybrid. And then our organization is geographically dispersed and teams are self-managed. So then I might tailor for the organization, right? So again, we can use the PMBOK through the models, the methods, and the artifacts. We can pick and choose which of these helps us support the project. Now, that concept is really not new. I mean, many of us have been doing that for many years. Well before that was introduced in the PMBOK, but I'm really glad that I'm part of an organization that is recognizing that we not only can but should be tailoring, right? The idea of checklisting is gone. It's really retired completely. I think if you take a look at what the PMBOK says nowadays, I remember my first project management methodology that I was exposed to. This was, gosh, a long time ago, over 30 years ago. And they said, oh, hey, here's Arthur Anderson's project management methodology. And it was a bookshelf of books, right? And you're supposed to be able to use all this stuff to run your projects. Well, that's ridiculous, right? No one ever ran a project like that. It's too cumbersome. It's too much overhead. It's too much bureaucracy. And so the idea is that we have to tailor what we're doing as project managers to meet our business need. And that's really what the new version of the PMBOK, I think, helps, or at least definitely supports us in doing that. So again, we tailor for the organization, then there's specifics about our project, we tailor for the project, and then we implement ongoing improvement as well. And so graphically, it might look something like this. Select a development approach, tailor for the organization, tailor for the project, and then ongoing improvement. All right, so that's that idea. Let me check the chats here. So let's see, where do we leave off? Emily, is the performance domain uncertainty just highlighting risk, or is there more to uncertainty? No, it's basically they're using, I'm just going to give you my opinion. They're using the term uncertainty and risk fairly synonymously. But I would invite you to go check out that section of the PMBOK. It won't take you long to get through it. It's pretty streamlined. Andy asks, it appears that PMI is adopting a number of disciplined agile concepts in the PMP exams. Would obtaining your DASM be a good starting point for starting the PMP journey? I'm going to say that depends. I'm going to pick that question back up at the end if we can, because that's going to take me a little bit off of where we're going with the 7th edition. I actually think that's probably a good idea, but it kind of depends on where you're at, what industry you're in, what your organization's doing, probably several different factors. And Michael asked, what about using an A3? Yeah, I mean, A3 to me is just another form, another way of formatting information. Certainly, you could be tailoring that in, or using, if your organization is using other artifacts, or that obviously, I think in terms of tailoring your project, you want to be able to, you have to consider that as part of the internal environment, right? The internal environment within which you're working. Michael, hopefully I answered your question. All right, I'm gonna see if I'm gonna continue on, and then I'll come back to any other questions at the end. I want to talk a little bit about the PMI Standards Plus. In the interest of time, I think I am not going to run you through this little video, but what I do want to do, because it's about 1.5 minutes long, almost 2 minutes long, but I think it is pretty cool what they're doing. I do want to show this to you really quickly. So what we've done with the PMI Standards Plus is, again, made kind of a digital platform for knowledge that they decided not to cram into the PMBOK, right? So for instance, let me go out to the PMI standards here. And it says, hey, because I'm a PMI member, I can access this. Again, my login expired, duh. And I can access it. It wants me to register again, but I'm already logged in. So, and then what I can do is I can take a look at the PMI standards. So, for instance, if I were looking for a particular topic, I might say I'm looking for, I don't know, communications, and I might want to filter that for healthcare and show me any of the case studies, right? And I'll go ahead and apply that. And now, here's some case studies. It'll also get hits for any places that term shows up in the PMBOK or other publications, which I think is pretty cool. So there's a lot of great information out here. If you have not come out here and looked at this, if you're a PMI member, I would, again, encourage you to spend a few minutes taking a look at it. One of the things I do want to point out, though, kind of going back to my earlier point, is you'll notice that in the PMI Standards Plus, the 6th edition of the PMBOK is listed in here. So all that stuff that was covered in the 6th edition, they didn't necessarily throw that out, right? To say, oh, here's the 7th edition. The 6th edition is now obsolete. Go burn it in your backyard, like I did with the 1st edition. It's still there, and it's still good reference. It's just they're asking us to consider it as a reference point. Neither one of these publications is trying to say here's everything, absolutely everything you need to know about project management, if that's making any sense to you. Okay, I probably need to wrap up. This is just the idea that ITTOs are still important, and the 6th edition is still around. And that's kind of the point I already made. So my last slide is just, here's some highlights of the changes from the last PMBOK edition. You can see, we've tried to summarize them here on this slide. Some of it is the same. Some of it really hasn't changed in terms of these different categories. but some of it I think has been a significant change. Again, I think it's raising our role a little bit into more of a business partner and less of technician, if you will. So that's everything I had. I know I'm only leaving a few more minutes. Oh, sorry. Here's our team member. Some of our trainers. This isn't all of us, but here's some of the trainers on the Peak Training Network. Harry and Barb and Orlando and Susan. One of the things I do want to mention is that if you are thinking about DASM certification, if you're thinking about PMP certification, you can get to a link to Peak off of the PMI, the NEO PMI page, and you use one of these codes, PMP 200 or DASM 200, it gets you $200 discount right away. So don't pay retail. That's my message there. With that, I will ask if there's any other questions and turn things back over to Amir. And I'm looking at the chat right now. Bridging the gap. What would be a key consideration in bridging the process of old PMBOK to new principles in the PMBOK, especially considering those that are already PM certified? So Jasly, I guess the way I would answer that question is to say, I think just sticking your nose into the 7th edition is a good way to help bridge that gap to understand the principles. I would definitely spend some time perusing just through the standard, even if you don't get into all the techniques and models. If you just reference those through the PMI standards, I mean, because it gives you a nice electronic way to search for stuff. I think it'll just help kind of steep you in thinking about where PMI is going in terms of becoming more principle versus process oriented. I hope that makes some sense. And Michael, yes, I was thinking as it should be on the visual approaches list. I might have to follow up with you separately because I'm not sure I'm understanding your question. I apologize. Did you want to come off mic and ask that question? Or Emma, are you cutting me off now?
Hi, Betty. I think we are like we are at 1. Just Vinay will close, and maybe personally, if there's any question, they can reach out to you.
Okay, very good. Let me stop sharing, or you pulled the sharing away from me? Okay, very good.
Yeah, so let's thank you, Pete. Thank you for your nice talk.
Sure.
On the screen, you have code to claim your PDUs on the website, so you can go on your My PMI account and go to the education part and claim your PDU for today's session. And you can just go out to our websites to know more about upcoming events, including the Tech Thursday talk. So you'll be updated. And if you're following PMI Northeast Ohio on different social medias, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and you can also just subscribe to these emails. You might actually get your all emails about the events as and when they're updated. And just to earn more PDUs, you can go to different events, podcasts, talks like these to get more PDUs to keep your certifications updated. And at the end, thank you everybody for joining on this talk. Unless there's something else that Amir wants to add, I think this should be the end.